William Law's A Serious Call to a Devout and Holy Life, published in 1728, is one of the most influential works of English devotional literature. It is a deeply convicting, clear-eyed challenge to anyone who professes Christian faith but lives a life of half-hearted discipleship. The book is not about spiritual extremes. It's about spiritual consistency. Law's central claim is this: devotion is not part of life. It is life. Overview. A Serious Call is written as a wake-up call for ordinary Christians, especially the comfortable, respectable ones, to live in wholehearted devotion to God. It is a call to spiritual seriousness, not somberness, and to practical holiness, not legalism. Key themes. 1. Christianity is a 24/7 calling. Law insists that being a Christian is not a Sunday morning activity. Whether you're a lawyer, a merchant, a soldier, or a servant, your life must be ordered by love for God. There is no part of life, eating, working, resting, conversing, that does not belong to God. He who has learned to pray as he ought has got the secret of holy and happy life. Number 2, the danger of lukewarm religion. Law critiques a faith that looks outwardly respectable but is inwardly apathetic. He's especially hard on those who go through the motions of religion while living selfish, indulgent lives. He calls this mock Christianity. The one who lives no better than a heathen cannot hope to die the death of a saint. Number 3, discipline and simplicity. Law emphasizes self-examination, intentional prayer, and regular rhythm of devotion. He encourages early rising, ordered days, scripture reading, and private prayer, not as legalistic duties, but as training in love. Number 4, love as the root of devotion. For Law, holiness is not about austere rule-keeping. It's about becoming like Christ by loving what God loves. He grounds everything in charity and humility. Devotion signifies a life given or devoted to God. Influence and legacy. John Wesley read this work and was so moved that he said it awakened in him a passion for holiness. George Whitefield wept as he read it and described it as a blessing to my soul. C.S. Lewis later called it a book that no Christian can afford to ignore. Countless modern and spiritual formation movements echo Law's themes. Why it still matters. In a time of distractions, hustle, and shallow spirituality, Law's serious call rings truer than ever. He does not ask us to do more religious things. He asks us to become more truly devoted, offering all of life as worship. Chapter 1, Summary: The Necessity of Devotion for All Christians. William Law opens a serious call by confronting a widespread but dangerous assumption that serious devotion to God is only required of clergy, monks, or especially religious people. Against this notion, Law asserts that every Christian, no matter their station, occupation, or education, is called to live wholly for God. He defines devotion not as emotional fervor or religious ritual, but as a way of life ordered by love for God. It means offering all of life, eating, working, resting, speaking, as an act of worship. Devotion for Law is not a part of life. Devotion signifies a life given or devoted to God. He emphasizes that Christianity is not fulfilled by occasional piety or Sunday attendance. Rather, it demands a daily, disciplined, joyful commitment to love and obey God in all things. A Christian who lives like everyone else, motivated by vanity, greed, or ease, is in Law's eyes no Christian at all. To illustrate his point, Law introduces Flavia, an imaginary woman of high society. Flavia is polite, attends church, and is outwardly moral. Yet her life is governed by vanity, luxury, and the opinions of others. She does nothing sinful by society's standards, but she also does nothing intentionally for the glory of God. Flavia is not wicked. She's just spiritually asleep. And that, Law argues, is the very danger facing the church. She has no more renounced the world than she has renounced the law of Moses. This chapter is a call to wake up, to take seriously that God desires not just moments of religious attention, but the entirety of our lives. Law insists that a life of devotion is not only possible, but required for anyone who claims the name of Christ. Chapter 2 Summary: Living to the Glory of God in Every Vocation. In Chapter 2, William Law builds on his foundational claim that devotion is not confined to religious professionals. He now presses further, insisting that every calling, whether soldier, merchant, servant, or scholar, must be undertaken for the glory of God. The glory of God is the sole end of all actions of a good Christian. Law challenges the idea that some careers are secular and thus exempt from spiritual discipline. To him, there is no such thing as a secular life for Christian people. Every role in society, whether prestigious or humble, can be lived as an act of worship if governed by the love of God and neighbor. He insists that a life spent laboring in a shop, managing a household, or working in the fields can be just as holy as the life of a monk or a minister if it's done with humility, charity, and reverence. To illustrate, Law introduces Eusebius, an imaginary nobleman. Eusebius is active in politics and business, but his true aim is always to serve God. He gives generously, speaks kindly, refuses flattery and vanity, and sees his influence as a stewardship. His whole life, his work, his meals, his conversations is infused with devotion. Eusebius is Law's vision of the ideal Christian. He is strict in the government of himself, regular in his devotions, and full of humility and condescension. This chapter makes clear that piety is not a matter of withdrawal from the world, but of intentional faithfulness within it. No matter your role in society, Law says your chief business is not wealth or reputation. It is the glory of God. Chapter 3 Summary: Prayers and Devotions for the Morning. In Chapter 3, William Law shifts from principle to practice. If the Christian life is to be fully devoted to God, it must begin each day with intentional morning prayer and reflection. Law's point is simple but urgent. He who has not devoutly given thanks to God for the events of the past night has not begun his day as a Christian. Law criticizes the habit of rising from bed and rushing into business or pleasure without a single thought of God. Such a life, he argues, is one of spiritual carelessness. The soul, like the body, needs to be awakened, centered, and strengthened, and the morning is the soul's first battleground. He proposes a clear rhythm of morning devotion. Rise early, not out of superstition, but out of discipline. Offer thanks for the protection of the night. Confess your dependence on God for the coming day. Offer the whole day as a sacrifice of love. Pray for strength to resist temptation and to live in charity. Reflect on a portion of Scripture or sacred truth. Law also warns against praying out of habit or speed. Morning devotion should be unhurried and sincere, not mechanical. The quality of a day's choices, he believes, often flows from this very first moment of orientation toward God. To illustrate, Law introduces Theotimus, a businessman who prays quickly in the morning but then lives the rest of the day as if God were irrelevant. Theotimus is not a terrible man, but his prayers are detached from his life. They are a ritual, not a relationship. He prays for humility, but is proud of the rest of the day. Law calls instead for prayers that shape our actions, not just our moods. The goal of devotion, he insists, is transformation. Chapter 4 Summary: Humility and Self-Examination. In Chapter 4 of a series called to a Devout and Holy Life, William Law turns to one of the central Christian virtues, humility. He argues that humility is not merely admirable, it is absolutely essential to true devotion. Without it, all outward acts of religion, no matter how polished, are hollow. Pride must die in you, or nothing of heaven can live within you. Law challenges the tendency to view ourselves as good enough or better than most. Instead, he calls believers to adopt the posture of a penitent soul, continually aware of their need for grace. This posture is practiced through self-examination, a daily spiritual discipline rooted in honesty before God and in love. True humility, Law explains, is not self-hatred or groveling. It is a clear-sighted view of oneself in the light of God's holiness, an honest reckoning with our frailty, our sin, and our total dependence on divine mercy. It's not thinking less of ourselves, it's thinking truthfully about ourselves. To illustrate the danger of pride, Law introduces Paternus, a man of respectable morals and public virtue. Paternus avoids scandal and performs religious duties. Yet he quietly congratulates himself for being superior to others. His religion is clean on the outside, but corrupted by inward smugness and judgment. He thanks God that he is not like other men, but forgets that this very thought proves he is worse. Paternus serves as a mirror for the reader, a sobering warning that pride can hide beneath a cloak of religious respectability. Law urges believers to regularly reflect on their faults and sins, avoid comparing themselves to others, reject the craving for praise and recognition, cultivate a spirit of meekness, repentance, and dependence on grace. Devotion is only real when it flows from a broken and contrite heart. For Law, humility is the soil in which all other virtues grow. Without it, the spiritual life becomes a performance. With it, the soul becomes fertile ground for the Spirit of God. Chapter 5 Summary: Resisting Pride and Vanity in the Pursuit of Holiness. In Chapter 5, William Law continues his focus on pride, but shifts the lens to its more subtle and seductive form, vanity. Pride, he warns, doesn't always roar. It often whispers, flattering the soul through appearance, reputation, and the desire to please others. Vanity is the certain ruin of every soul that harbors it, and yet it is the most common of all tempers and finds the easiest entrance into every condition of life. Law laments how even those who aspire to be religious can be enslaved by vanity. People may read devotionals, attend church, or give generously, but secretly long to be seen doing good. So, their motives, he says, are tainted, not by evil acts, but by a craving for admiration. He illustrates this with the character Flavia, a fashionable young woman who performs charitable acts and attends public worship, but is completely consumed with how she appears to others. Her devotions are real, but they are constantly shaped by how they might be perceived. She has more concern for her reputation in the world than for her soul before God. Flavia is Law's warning that piety can become performance. Vanity turns even holy things into opportunities for self-promotion. Law exhorts readers to examine their motivations for religious behavior, seek secrecy in charity and prayer, as Jesus taught. Consider whether their actions would change if no one noticed them. Value truthfulness before God more than appearance before people. Ultimately, Law is not urging Christians to retreat from beauty or influence, but to purify their hearts so that all they do flows from love of God rather than from a love of self. He who lives only to please man will never please God. Chapter 5 reinforces the radical interiority of Law's message that true devotion begins not with how we appear, but with what we desire. Chapter 6 summary, devotion in the life of a businessman or tradesman. In Chapter 6, William Law addresses a common objection. Isn't serious devotion impossible for those who are busy with worldly work? His answer is direct. No, devotion is not only possible in business, it is essential. Every man has time to be religious, unless he willfully chooses to throw it away. Law insists that a life of holiness is not limited to monasteries or pulpits. The Christian businessman, merchant, or tradesman is called to the same depth of devotion as the clergyman. Their work, though secular in form, must be spiritual in purpose, conducted with honesty, humility, diligence, and charity. He introduces the character Castillo, a respectable and successful merchant. Castillo is careful in business, avoids scandal, and goes to church. But his thoughts are consumed with profit, comparison, and personal advancement. His true God is success, and religion is more of a safety net than the center. He is called a Christian, but he is only a Christian in name. By contrast, Law describes Theophilus, another businessman who performs the same work as Castillo, but with a heart orientated toward God. He gives fair wages, treats customers with kindness, resists greed, and begins and ends each day in prayer. His business is an altar, and his work is a form of worship. Law calls every working person to begin the day with intentional devotion, conduct all business with justice and mercy, refuse to compromise spiritual integrity for worldly gain, see their vocation as an opportunity to love their neighbor and to glorify God. You may be just as devout at your trade as you can be at the altar. This chapter is one of Law's most practical. It declares that spiritual greatness is possible in every field. If the heart is set on God, the shop and the sanctuary, the desk and the prayer closet are not separate worlds. Chapter 7 summary, using wealth without corruption. In Chapter 7, William Law addresses the temptations and responsibilities of wealth. He makes it clear that being rich is not a sin, but misusing wealth and hoarding it for selfish pleasure is spiritually dangerous. Riches are a trust from God, and to live only to ourselves and not to the good of others is to be a faithless steward. Law challenges the idea that prosperity automatically justifies itself. He insists that the rich are not permitted to live in ease and indulgences simply because they can afford to. Instead, they are called to live simply, give generously, and view their possessions as tools for good for the sake of others. He introduces Lucius, a wealthy man who lives in fine clothes, ornate furniture, and elaborate meals, not out of wickedness, but out of unthinking habit. Lucius is not overtly immoral. He is simply unaware that his lifestyle, though socially acceptable, is spiritually shallow. Lucius imagines himself innocent because he is not scandalous. But religion does not call us to avoid scandal. It calls us to imitate Christ. Law contrasts Lucius with a better example. The believer who lives below their means, uses their income to relieve the poor, supports ministry, and keeps their desires in check. This person views luxury not as their right, but as a distraction from love and holiness. Law's key points. Wealth is a gift and a test. How we use it reveals our hearts. The Christian should live simply, without vanity or excess. Giving to the poor is not optional. It is a Christian duty. Self-indulgence is incompatible with humility in Christ. You have no right to the luxuries of life while others want for the necessities. This chapter is a powerful rebuke to comfortable Christianity. Law reminds readers that discipleship costs something, and that true devotion must extend to how we spend, give, and consume. Chapter 8 Summary. Guidance for the poor and lowly. In Chapter 8, William Law turns his attention to the poor, those with little education, no public influence, and limited means. His message is striking. You are just as capable of a holy life as the wealthy or the learned, perhaps more so. God is no respecter of persons. He does not regard the outward state, but the inward heart. Law rejects any notion that holiness is only for the privileged. He insists that devotion is accessible to all, regardless of social rank, income, or education. In fact, the simplicity of a poor person's life often shields them from the distractions and vanities that entangle the rich. He offers practical guidance for how the poor can live devout lives. Begin each day with prayer. Offer all labor, no matter how humble, as a service to God. Treat neighbors with kindness and avoid gossip or envy. Practice contentment, trusting that God knows your needs. Be faithful in little, and you will be great in God's sight. To illustrate, Law introduces a character, Rusticus, a poor laborer who lives in a small cottage and works with his hands. Though he owns little, he gives thanks daily, speaks no ill of others, avoids vice, and keeps a warm heart toward God and man. Though Rusticus cannot read and owns no books but the Bible, he is wiser in the things of God than many who are proud of their learning. Law argues that a devout servant may be more righteous than a lukewarm bishop because God looks at faithfulness, not fame. He concludes with a call to honor the lowly and to remember that in God's kingdom the last may be first. Poverty is no hindrance to piety, but often its helper. This chapter affirms that the spiritual life is not gated by status. Anyone, no matter how hidden or humble, can become a saint. Chapter 9 Summary. Charity as a Christian duty, not a mere virtue. In Chapter 9, William Law makes a bold claim. Charity, love for others expressed through generosity and service, is not just a virtue. It is a non-negotiable requirement of the Christian life. To fail in charity, he says, is to fail in Christianity. He that lives only to himself is dead to God and to the world. Law exposes the common illusion that charity is something extra, a good deed we choose if we are especially kind or inspired. Instead, he insists that charity is the command rooted in the very nature of God and the central teaching of Christ. He critiques the tendency to give only what is convenient or minimal. True charity, he argues, requires sacrifice. It's not just about tossing coins to the poor. It's about orientating our whole life around love and service. Law introduces the character Fulvia, a fashionable woman who occasionally donates to charity, especially when others are watching. She enjoys helping the deserving poor, but avoids personal discomfort or involvement. Fulvia gives, but she does not love. Her generosity is cosmetic, done from a distance, without compassion or true concern. Law uses her to warn against charity without heart, which may soothe the conscience, but does not reflect the love of God. In contrast, Law praises the kind person who lives simply so that others may simply live, sees all possessions as God's loan, not as personal property, actively seeks opportunities to relieve suffering and need, gives anonymously and joyfully, expecting no reward, feels the pain of others, and is moved to action. There is no piety without love, and there is no love without giving. Law's vision of charity is deeply Christ-like, not merely helpful, but self-giving, humble, and constant. He reminds us that on the last day, we will not be judged by how much we owned, but by how much we loved. Chapter 10 Summary: The Use of Time and the Danger of Idleness. In Chapter 10, William Law turns to one of the most neglected areas of spiritual life, how we use our time. He argues that wasting time is not just unwise, but unholy. Every hour that is not used in love, labor, or prayer is an hour lost to God. Time is the measure of our life, and to lose time is to lose life itself. Law is especially critical of idleness, not just the lazy, but in the respectable. He notes how easily people spend entire mornings in bed, afternoons in idle conversation or entertainment, and evenings in vanity without a single thought of eternity. He's not opposed to rest or refreshment, but he insists that our time must have a purpose beyond self-amusement. Every day is a gift from God, and we will be accountable for how we spend it. Law introduces the character of Eugenius, a well-off gentleman who is neither wicked nor scandalous, but he drifts through life in ease, sleeping late, enjoying long meals, reading for entertainment, socializing without depth, and praying only when convenient. He avoids sin, but also avoids service. Eugenius does no harm, but neither does he do any good. Law warns that lukewarm, wasteful existence is one of the greatest dangers for the soul. It fosters forgetfulness of God, dulls the conscience, and leads to a life that is respectable in the eyes of the world, but barren in the eyes of heaven. He urges believers to rise early and begin the day with prayer, set intentional goals for work, study, service, and devotion, avoid aimless activity and long indulgences in leisure, reflect often on the brevity of life and the nearness of eternity, redeem time as sacred currency to be invested in love, learning, and worship. You have no time to spare. Every day well used may become a step toward heaven. Law's message is sobering but empowering. The minutes of your life are not small things. They are eternal moments, and how you use them shapes your soul. Chapter 11 Summary: Resisting Overindulgence and Living with Self-Denial. In Chapter 11, William Law takes aim at the familiar but often excused sin, overindulgence, especially in food, drink, and comfort. He argues that excessive pleasure in bodily comforts dulls the soul and undermines a life of devotion. A man who makes it a rule to please his appetite and indulge his senses is unfit to be a servant of God. Law does not advocate for extreme asceticism or rejection of good gifts. Instead, he calls for moderation, discipline, and spiritual focus, what he refers to as Christian temperance. The believer must not be mastered by desire, even of lawful things. He illustrates this with the character Cornelius, a good-natured man who avoids scandal and attends church, but who habitually indulges in large meals, fine wine, and excessive comfort. Cornelius excuses these habits as harmless, even respectable, But law warns that the love of pleasure, even innocent pleasure, can render the soul lazy, proud, and spiritually sluggish. Cornelius is not a drunkard, but he is mastered by appetite, and appetite is his God. By contrast, the truly devout Christian practices self-denial, not out of gloom, but out of joyful obedience. This means eating and drinking for nourishment, not indulgence, refusing habits that soften the will or weaken spiritual vigilance, training the body to serve the soul rather than rule it, embracing simplicity as a way of making space for God. Law draws from the life of Christ, who fasted, endured hunger, and lived simply. He reminds readers that the cross of Christ is not only to be admired, but imitated. He who cannot deny himself a foolish pleasure cannot possibly think that he could take up the cross. This chapter is a call to watchfulness and restraint, not as burdens, but as pathways to freedom. For law, a life of devotion requires mastery of the body, not rejection of it, but redemption of it through discipline. Chapter 12, Summary. Night Devotions and Reflection on Mortality. In Chapter 12, William Law urges readers to end each day as they begin it, with God. Just as the morning should be devoted to prayer and offering the day ahead, the evening must be a time of reflection, repentance, and rest in God's mercy. Sleep is death's image, and so the end of every day should bring us to consider the end of life. Law emphasizes that night is a sacred time, not just for rest, but for spiritual preparation. The day's end is an opportunity to take account of one's actions, confess one's sins, offer thanks, and renew the soul's orientation toward heaven. He critiques those who fall into bed thoughtlessly, having spent the evening in idle conversation, entertainment, and indulgence, without any inward turn toward God. Law warns that this kind of spiritual carelessness hardens the heart over time. To illustrate, he introduces Eusebia, a woman of polite society who fills her evenings with dinner parties and amusements, always avoiding silence and solitude. She is outwardly moral, but inwardly distracted. She goes to sleep without ever considering her soul. She lives well enough for this world, but not well enough for the next. By contrast, Law describes the practice of a devout believer who reviews the events of the day with humility and honesty, who offers prayers of thanksgiving and repentance, who asks for divine protection during the night, reflects on death not with fear, but with preparation and hope, who falls asleep trusting God's mercy and grace. Let every night find you more prepared than your last. Law does not promote fear, but spiritual alertness. Night, like life, is not guaranteed. Therefore, the soul should live each day and close each night as if eternity were near. This chapter is both practical and pastoral. Law's invitation is not to anxiety, but to peace through prayer. A peace grounded in watchfulness, humility, and communion with God at the close of each day. Chapter 13 Summary. The example of a devout and holy life in every station. In Chapter 13, William Law offers a powerful shift from critique to vision. He paints a detailed portrait of what a truly devout life could look like in various walks of life, not in theory, but in practice. His message is clear. Holiness is possible in every station of life. Devotion is not tied to any particular time, place, or calling. It is the spirit and intention of our lives. To make this real, Law introduces the example of Miranda, a young woman of modest wealth. Miranda lives simply, avoids vanity, and devotes her time to prayer, care for the poor, and honest labor. She does not withdraw from society, but engages it with love, humility, and purpose. Her life is marked by regular and reverent prayer, thoughtful stewardship of her possessions, modesty in dress and behavior, compassion toward servants and neighbors, intentional simplicity to free her resources for others. Her life is a constant exercise of charity, humility, patience, and devotion. Through Miranda, Law dismantles the idea that deep devotion is only for monks or ministers. He shows that a life of prayer and love can flourish in a home, a business, or a town square just as surely as it can in a monastery. He also describes devout men in trades, in the army, and in public service, all living with integrity, prayer, and purpose. These examples serve to inspire the reader to imagine what it would look like for their own role in life to become a living offering to God. Law's key message: your station in life is not an obstacle to holiness. It is your altar. Every job, every social status, and every season in life can become a setting for transformation. What matters most is the intention of the heart, to love God and to love neighbor fully. Let every Christian strive to make their life one of uninterrupted act of love and devotion. This chapter is one of Law's most encouraging. It offers not guilt, but possibility, the call to turn every part of life into an act of worship, regardless of wealth, title, or education. Chapter 14 Summary: The Folly of a Half-Hearted Christianity. In Chapter 14, William Law draws a sharp line between true devotion and what he calls lukewarm religion. His central argument is that half-hearted Christianity is not Christianity at all. A life of mild moral decency, occasional prayer, and superficial good behavior without sincere love for God is self-deception. No one can live in the Spirit of Christ and yet live as the world lives. Law confronts the most common religious mindset that says, "I'm better than most. I haven't done anything seriously wrong." He argues this attitude produces complacency within the soul, just enough to feel safe, but never enough to become holy. He illustrates this through the figure of Laertius, a man who attends church, avoids scandal, and holds polite religious opinions, but whose heart is fixed on comfort, reputation, and worldly success. Laertius is kind, social, and admired, but inwardly his devotion is cold and calculated. Laertius is content to be not too bad, never daring to be fully good. Law critiques this idea that Christians can keep a safe middle path, being respectable without being radical. He insists that Christ does not call people to moderation, but to total surrender. Key points from this chapter: true devotion requires a full turning of one's heart to God, not just to religious habits. A lukewarm life neither glorifies God nor benefits the soul. Respectable behavior without inward transformation is not enough. Christianity is not a matter of avoiding evil, but of actively pursuing holiness. To live for both God and the world is to live for neither. You may avoid the sins of the publican, yet still lack the heart of the penitent. This chapter is Law's warning bell. He invites readers not to guilt, but to urgency. Christianity is a call to total renewal of life, not to moral mediocrity. You must give yourself wholly to God, or not at all. Chapter 15 Summary: The Power of Intention, Doing Everything for the Glory of God. In Chapter 15, William Law turns to the transformative power of intention. His thesis is simple and profound. It is not what you do, but why you do it that determines the spiritual value of your actions. The holiness or unholiness of any action is entirely determined by the intention with which it is done. This chapter is a call to radical internal reorientation. Law urges believers to live every moment, not just church attendance or explicit acts of charity, with the conscious intention of pleasing God and growing in love. Whether you are eating a meal, managing a business, raising children, or cleaning a floor, it can be holy if it is done with a heart directed to God. Law critiques a widespread divide between sacred and secular activities. He argues that this division is false. All of life is sacred when lived in the right spirit. The farmer in the field and the monk in the chapel are equally capable of devotion if their hearts are rightly aimed. To illustrate, Law returns to the character of Theophila, a devout woman who transforms every part of her ordinary life into a spiritual offering. She dresses plainly, not for show, but for modesty's sake. She speaks kindly, not to be admired, but to bless. She eats with gratitude, works with care, and gives generously, not to earn favor, but to glorify God. She is as holy at her table as she is upon her knees. Law's key applications. Examine your motives as much as your actions. Dedicate every task, no matter how small, to God's glory. Begin your day by intending to please God in all things. Avoid acting from vanity, fear of others, or mere routine. Let your whole life become one continuous act of worship. A life governed by holy intentions turns the ordinary into the divine. This chapter is both freeing and challenging. Law insists that you don't need to change your situation to become holy. You need to change your aim. With right intention, even the most mundane life becomes a sacred one. Chapter 16 summary. The devout life is reasonable, not extreme. In Chapter 16, William Law anticipates and responds to a common objection that living a devout and holy life, as he describes it, is too extreme, too strict, and too impractical for the average person. His reply is forceful and clear. True devotion is not fanatical. It is perfectly reasonable. Devotion is only unreasonable to those who do not wish to reform their lives. Law argues that we accept rigor and discipline in many areas of life, in health, education, careers, and military service. Yet when it comes to the soul, the most important part of who we are, we excuse laziness, distraction, and spiritual indifference as normal. He challenges the reader. Why should the pursuit of eternal joy demand less from us than the pursuit of earthly success? What seems extreme only appears so in contrast to lukewarm culture and compromise. To make his point vivid, Law introduces a figure called Calidus, a man who prides himself on being reasonable in religion. He avoids excess and never goes too far in anything. He looks down on the devout as overly zealous, but in truth his religion is shallow and self-serving. His moderation has become spiritual mediocrity. Calidus has just enough religion to make him respectable, but not enough religion to make him righteous. Law insists that holiness is not extremism. It is simply what it means to love God with all one's heart, soul, mind, and strength. The Christian life demands a consistent life of prayer and self-examination, generosity that costs something, humility that challenges pride, a refusal to be ruled by the appetite, opinion, or convenience, a joyful willingness to follow Christ even when it is costly. He who fears to go too far in holiness has already gone too far in worldliness. This chapter is both a defense and an invitation. Law reminds us that devotion is not about doing extraordinary things, but doing ordinary things with extraordinary purpose, love, and faith. Chapter 17 summary. Self-denial, the foundation of Christian virtue. In Chapter 17, William Law returns to one of the key principles of the Christian life, self-denial. He asserts that no one can truly follow Christ without learning to say no to themselves regularly and decisively. Self-denial is the very life of piety. Law grounds this teaching in the words of Jesus, "If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross daily, and follow me." He emphasizes that self-denial is not optional or only for those who are especially devout believers. It is the universal call of discipleship. What does self-denial look like? It is not a dramatic act of asceticism or self-punishment. Rather, it's the daily habit of choosing God's will over one's own. That may mean saying no to vanity or self-promotion, restraining appetites for food, comfort, or entertainment, rejecting desires for revenge, praise, or ease, quietly enduring hardship or inconvenience with patience, prioritizing others' needs over personal convenience. To illustrate, Law introduces the character of Julius, a man who wants to be religious but also insists on all of his comforts, leisure, and reputation. Julius avoids anything that requires sacrifice. He prays, but only when convenient. He gives, but only when he can still afford luxuries. Julius wants to go to heaven, but not by the narrow way. In contrast, Law describes the soul shaped by discipline and humility. The person who practices self-denial is not joyless. Rather, they are free from slavery to appetites, free to love without agenda, free to obey God with an undivided heart. Law argues that self-denial is not about suppression, but liberation. It makes the soul strong, awake, and aligned with the character of Christ. A Christian is to be known, not by the greatness of his gifts, but by the mastery of himself. This chapter is a sober challenge to comfortable Christianity. Law reminds us that real transformation will always cost us something, and that self-denial is not drudgery. It is the narrow but joyful road that leads to life. Chapter 18 Summary: Intercession, the duty and power of praying for others. In Chapter 18, William Law shifts from personal discipline to intercessory prayer, urging believers to recognize that praying for others is not merely kind, it is a sacred duty. He argues that intercession is the essential act of love deeply woven into the Christian life. You cannot truly love your neighbor if you do not pray for them. Law teaches that intercession expands the heart in humility and compassion, connects the believer to the whole body of Christ, awakens empathy, gratitude, and a sense of responsibility, pleases God, and draws down grace into the lives of others. He critiques the self-centered nature of most people's prayers, which revolve around personal needs, desires, or fears. Such narrow prayers, he says, miss the spirit of Christ, who prayed constantly for others, including his enemies. To illustrate the act of intercession, Law describes the character Philo, a devout man who prays daily for his own soul, but never once thinks to pray for his friends, his community, or the poor. Though Philo is sincere in his devotion, his love is small and self-contained. Philo's prayers rise no higher than his own doorstep. Law contrasts him with Christian, who regularly intercedes for family, friends, and neighbors, enemies and those who have caused harm, the sick, the poor, and the imprisoned, the church, the nation, and the world. He urges believers to make intercession daily, to make it a daily rhythm, even suggesting a structured plan. Dedicate certain times of day to pray for specific groups. Use scriptures like the Psalms or Paul's letters as models for intercession. Let every act of love be accompanied by prayer. He who makes intercession a habit lives with a heart like Christ's heart. Law emphasizes that intercession trains the soul in charity, lifts the mind above petty concerns, and reminds us that the Christian life is never private. It is always communal. Chapter 19 Summary: Praying for our enemies and those who offend us. In Chapter 19, William Law tackles one of the hardest yet most Christ-like disciplines in the Christian life: praying for our enemies. He teaches that interceding for those who wrong us is not an extraordinary thing to do. It is foundational to genuine Christianity. To forgive is divine, but to pray for those who injure us is to be united to the heart of Christ. Law grounds this command in Jesus' own teaching. Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. He insists that a person cannot truly claim to follow Christ while harboring resentment, bitterness, or indifference towards those who have caused him harm. He addresses the tendency to excuse ourselves by saying, I forgive, but I cannot forget. Law responds that true forgiveness is not merely the absence of hatred, it is the active presence of goodwill, and that goodwill is best expressed through prayer. To illustrate, he presents the character Hermippus, a morally upright man who is deeply offended by past betrayal. Though he doesn't seek revenge, he avoids his offender and never prays for him. His heart is cold. Law argues that this kind of respectable unforgiveness is still spiritual failure. Hermippus wants to go to heaven, but not with his enemy. Law teaches that we must pray earnestly for those who have wronged us, ask for their healing, blessing, and spiritual renewal. Let go of the need to be vindicated or remembered as right. Remember how much we have been forgiven by Christ. Allow prayer to transform our own hearts, softening them through grace. If we only pray for our friends, we are no better than anyone else in the world. This chapter pushes the reader to live the Sermon on the Mount, not just to admire it. It teaches that prayer is not just for intercession, it is for inner healing. Praying for our enemies frees us from the chains of offense and makes us more like Christ, who prayed from the cross, Father, forgive them. Chapter 19, The Danger of Delaying Devotion, the Danger of Eusebius. In this sobering chapter, William Law confronts one of the most subtle and dangerous temptations in the spiritual life, the temptation to delay. Many people admire holiness. They agree that a devout life is good and necessary. They may even plan to become serious about their faith. But they wait, and they wait, and they wait. William Law introduces us to Eusebius, a man who embodies this very tragedy. Eusebius is respectable, well-liked, and even religious in a general sense. He attends church, avoids scandal, and has every intention of becoming serious about God someday. In youth, he tells himself he'll commit to God when he's older. In midlife, he's too busy with work and social obligations. In old age, his spiritual desire has dried up, and though he once meant to be devout, he is now settled into his routine and far from God. Eusebius has always had everything in him that was good and desirable, except the will to put it into practice. His tragedy is not rebellion, but postponement. His intentions were good, but his intentions are not obedience. His delay becomes a spiritual undoing. Law's urgent message. Law warns that delay is not a passive act. It is a dangerous choice. To say, I will be devout later, is to actively resist God's call today. The soul grows dull through procrastination. Habits harden, priorities shift. Life only becomes more complex, not less. He writes, would you say, I'll take my medicine after I've been sick a little longer? Holiness must begin now, not after the next season, crisis, or achievement. Takeaways. Delaying devotion is a form of disobedience. The longer we wait, the more we lose the will and power to act. A devout life requires a decision, not merely an admiration or an intention. God calls on us now, while the soul is still soft, while the heart is still. Chapter 20 summary, The Danger of Worldly Conformity. In Chapter 20, William Law turns his focus to a subtle but deadly threat to the Christian life, worldly conformity, the tendency to shape one's thoughts, behaviors, and values according to society rather than Christ. He who lives to the world dies to God. Law warns that many professing Christians fall into the trap of blending in with the world around them, adopting its habits, pursuing its honors, fearing its disapprovals, while still attending church and maintaining an outward religion. This, he argues, is a form of self-deception. He critiques the mindset that says everyone lives this way, or it's not that sinful if it's that common. Law responds that truth is not determined by majority practice, and that comfort, fashion, or popularity are often the enemies of the cross. To illustrate this, Law introduces the character of Delilah, a woman who calls herself religious and attends worship regularly, yet her time, money, and energy are consumed by vanity, appearances, and social standing. Delilah's faith is shaped by what is acceptable, not by what is holy. Delilah fears being unfashionable more than she fears being unfaithful. Law calls for the believer to resist the gravitational pull of the world, measuring life by the gospel, not by social norms, refusing to be governed by reputation, wealth, or success, living simply, even if it means appearing foolish or different, practicing private devotion and public integrity, keeping eternity always in view. If your life pleases the world, it is not following the crucified Christ. Law does not call for a withdrawal from society, but for the courage to be distinctive within it. The Christian, he says, must be in the world, but not of it, a light in the darkness, a pilgrim on the narrow path. You must choose between the praise of men and the approval of God. This chapter is a call to holy nonconformity, a reminder that true devotion will often look strange to a world chasing ease, prestige, and self-interest. Chapter 21, Summary. God alone as the end of our actions. In Chapter 21, William Law distills one of the most profound themes of his entire work. The true aim of life is to please God, and God alone. Every act, thought, and intention must ultimately flow from a desire to glorify and love Him. He who lives not unto God lives in vain. Law challenges readers to consider what motivates their daily lives. Is it career, reputation, security, comfort? He insists that even good and moral people can waste their lives if their deepest intention is not centered on God. A person can be kind, generous, and even religious and still live without truly aiming their heart toward heaven. He critiques the subtle idolatry of self-driven virtue, doing good for admiration, praise, or a sense of achievement. Law insists that even the best works are empty if not directed to the glory of God. He revisits the example of Eusebius, a man admired by all for his moderation, kindness, and honesty. Yet Eusebius lives more for human respect than for divine pleasure. His life is lived unto himself, not unto God. Eusebius is not wicked, but his religion is cold because his heart is not on fire with the love of God. By contrast, the truly devout person sees God as the ultimate audience for every action, measures success not by outcome but by faithfulness, seeks no reward but God Himself. Prays, works, gives, speaks, and acts out of love, not out of performance, offers every moment as a sacrifice of praise. When God is the end of your life, everything becomes holy: your meals, your work, your rest, your words, and your play. Law emphasizes that this is not burdensome. It is liberating. Living unto God brings peace, clarity, and eternal significance to every part of our life. It replaces vanity with vision and fear with love. All that is not offered to God is lost. This chapter invites the reader to evaluate the aim of their life, not just what they do, but why they do it. In the end, Law calls us not simply to behave well, but to live wholly for God. Chapter 22 Summary. The Great Folly of Living for Anything but God. In Chapter 22, William Law deepens his call for wholehearted devotion by addressing the folly of living for anything other than God. This chapter is both reflective and sharp-edged, a final plea for readers to examine the direction of their lives and the object of their affections. What madness it is to live as if God were not the goal, and eternity not on the horizon. Law argues that many people, even professing Christians, spend their entire lives pursuing temporal things: money, fame, comfort, approval, or entertainment. These are not inherently evil, but they are empty as life's ultimate aim. To live for them is to trade eternity for dust. He critiques the widespread illusion that a well-managed, respectable life is enough so long as we stay out of trouble and do a few good deeds. But he says any life that is not centered on God is ultimately wasted. To illustrate, Law revisits Calidus, the worldly wise man who avoids extremes and prides himself on balanced living. But Calidus never gives himself fully to God. His religious observance is real, but tepid and calculated, and self-protective. Calidus desires to be safe, not sanctified. Law urges believers to take eternity seriously, not as an idea, but as a destination, to set their sights on pleasing God more than people, to refuse to spend their energy on things that cannot last, to treat every day as a preparation for meeting their Creator, to cultivate a longing for heaven, not just an escape from hell. The man who lives for God alone is never poor, never bored, and never lost. This chapter is a mirror and a wake-up call. It doesn't condemn, but it exposes. Law asks, what are you truly living for? The answer to that question, he insists, will define not only your present life, but your eternal destiny. Nothing is greater, wise, or noble, except that which is done for the glory of God. Chapter 23 Summary: The Blessedness of a Life Devoted to God. In Chapter 23, William Law turns from warning to encouragement, offering a vivid picture of joy, peace, and freedom that come from a life wholly devoted to God. After confronting the reader with the emptiness of worldly aims, he now shows the riches of God-centered existence. To live unto God is to live with the highest reason, the noblest purpose, and the truest joy. Law insists that holiness is not drudgery. It is blessedness. A life rooted in prayer, charity, humility, and self-denial is not only pleasing to God, it is deeply satisfying to the soul. It frees us from the tyranny of ego. It frees us from anxiety and from fleeting pleasure. He contrasts the inner peace of the devout person with the restless discontent of the worldly. While those who chase success or comfort are often weary, worried, or envious, the devout person walks in calmness and contentment because they are anchored in eternity. Law offers portraits of contented saints whose quiet lives shine with purpose. They are not famous or powerful. They may be poor or uneducated, but they are inwardly rich, full of love, prayer, simplicity, and gratitude. They have chosen the better part, and it will not be taken from them. Luke 10:42. According to Law, the devout person rises each day with gratitude and goes to rest in peace, finds joy in giving, patience in suffering, and strength in prayer, is unmoved by praise or insult because their identity is secure in God, lives not for the applause of others but for eternity, looks forward to death not with fear but with hope and readiness. Such a life creates heaven in the soul before it reaches heaven above. This chapter is Law's invitation not merely to avoid sin, but to taste the beauty of holiness. He reminds us that true religion is not about denial for its own sake, but about finding treasure that never fades. The happiest people on earth are those whose hearts are fixed on heaven. Chapter 24, Summary, Final Exhortation. Choose the life of devotion now. In Chapter 24, William Law concludes his monumental work with a fervent pastoral call to action. After laying out the path of serious Christian devotion, he now urges the reader, don't delay. Choose this life. Live it now. There is no wisdom in delay, no safety in indecision, and no peace in half-heartedness. Law pleads with his reader to stop admiring devotion from afar and begin practicing it today. He knows the temptation to put off a more spiritual life until a more convenient time comes, but he warns that such delay is dangerous. Every day lived without God is a day lost to eternity. He reminds the reader that God does not call us to perfection all at once, but to sincerity, a humble, honest, and wholehearted desire to live for Him. The first step, Law insists, is simply to decide, I will live wholly for God starting today. He challenges common excuses. I'm too busy. Well, then your soul is at risk of being crowded out. I'll start when I'm older. You may not have time later. I'm not holy enough. That's exactly why you need to begin. To encourage this resolve, Law reiterates the rewards of devotion: peace that the world cannot give, freedom from tyranny of public opinion, deep communion with God, a heart prepared for death, judgment, and eternity. The greatest thing you can do with your life is to give it back to God. He closes with a portrait of the devout soul, not perfect, but prayerful, not proud, but patient, not celebrated, but cherished by God. The world may not see your holiness, but heaven will. This final chapter is both a benediction and a challenge. The way of serious devotion is open to all. You must choose it. You must begin. And if you do, Law promises you will find joy, purpose, and God Himself on the path.